In the last video we mentioned Swedish radio from the 30s and promised to tell you about another radio manufacturer from Sweden, Dux, and an interesting and beautiful radio receiver from this company. We keep our promise. Meet the Dux Super Heterodyne model V64 from 1934. Few people know about such an interesting fact that the radio industry of the Kingdom of Sweden in the 30s was one of the leaders in pre-war Europe and remained so until the early 60s. Successfully competing with the largest radio manufacturers in Germany, Great Britain, Holland, Italy and Austria. Since their foundation, almost all radio manufacturers in Sweden have maintained close ties with one or more European or American companies as owners of patents and technologies, so they often simply duplicated their models. But in a higher quality design, especially in the manufacture of luxurious cases using expensive varieties of Karelian birch veneer and its root. At the same time, the design of the cases itself was quite simple and ordinary, without the exquisite rounded shapes inherent in radio receivers from Italy, Great Britain, Austria, or the United States. But with its unforgettable charm, all of the above fully applies to the Dux company, one of the leaders of the Swedish radio industry, and its V64 model of 34. This 6-tube radio receiver is essentially a copy of the Dutch model 525A from Philips, but in a much better design and especially in a much more expensive version of the case finish. A kind of Swedish suitcase, on the cusp of products from the world-famous Swedish manufacturer of extremely reliable cars Volvo, with the same production philosophy, quality above all. We were very surprised when we saw that the receiver, at its 90 years old, works perfectly and only needs a little adjustment, as well as minor cosmetic maintenance. And no replaced radio components. Even electrolytic and paper decoupling capacitors, which is a standard procedure for any repair of radio receivers that are more than 40 years old. There is a saying that a copy is always worse than the original. Somewhat doubtful. It seems that in this case reality completely refutes this statement. Of course, with the purchase of a license to produce this model from Philips, Dux retained the general schematic diagram, the type of radio tubes and the ultimately obtained characteristics, and many components, including radio tubes and speakers, are of Dutch manufacture. This also applies to the very low intermediate frequency of 115 kHz, the apologist of which was Philips, and until the very beginning of the 50s. In contrast to the standard of 460, 470 kHz, which competitors adhered to. Such a low intermediate frequency allowed to obtain greater sensitivity with the same number of radio tubes, but as you know, you win in one, you lose in another. In radio receivers with a 4 times lower intermediate frequency, selectivity had to be sacrificed. Here it is much worse, especially on the mirror channel. The receiver has only 2 ranges, long and medium waves. Although short waves at that time had already begun to gain popularity, and from the following year they were already used in all middle-class receivers. 6 radio tubes of the old standard with pin sockets were used, but 3 of them were of the new series at that time with new markings, AK1, AF2, AB1. And 3 with markings still according to the old digital system, E446, E443, 506. This radio receiver turned out to be quite popular, as evidenced by the nameplate number. 107,000 manufactured radio receivers are a colossal number of annual production at that time. It seems that we have remembered everything we wanted to tell you about. Next, a short excursion through the still live broadcast on medium waves and a request to express your opinion about this radio and this video. See you next Saturday.
Plusz 1 fok között, holnap napközben 0 fok körül alul.
Мы практически сейчас об этом говорим.
Гласовейна води, които помни.
Предаването на Звезден хоризонт продължава с следващата рубрика.